All right, folks, here trying to continue some of the content here on token design. This is going a little bit different direction from what we've been talking about and drilling in a little bit of more, something that I think that's missing in terms of token design, and I want to just use this to start the conversation. So here we go. So the issue is around demand, and I wanted to pose, when it comes up to demand and supply, to put it not in the context of blockchains, but to just use common sense and business experience. So what matters more to the success of any given company? Does it have a lot of demand, or is it when it has a lot of supply? If you're looking at stock in the stock market, which is more likely to have an impact on the value of the stock, that the market expects greater or increasing demand or greater supply? And in each case, we know the answer. It's demand, customers. And so if this is the case, why do most token-based protocols build out supply? Now, we don't have to go into the actual reasons. There's some actually legitimately good reasons, but the question is, there must still be some component of demand. Underneath it is typically a build it and they will come fallacy. And again, this isn't necessarily bad, because one of the promises is to be able to make something that doesn't exist, and presumably demand will follow. But we see time and time again in the adoption cycle for any kind of technology that doesn't guarantee growing demand. So we'll take a look at the next question, which is what generates demand? And in fact, it probably is really the number one question just in companies in general, not just protocols. Like, a startup ultimately has to ask itself, are they building something that people want? And so there are many approaches. There are lots of frameworks and expectations. And if you have a secret that's missing, please let me know privately, because it really is the essence of what builds successful companies. However, I thought it would be good to put here as part of the conversation things that just work in a Web 2, in a traditional business environment, and then anchor that in how we think about protocols. So one is, you've got to solve a huge and unsolved or a really poorly solved problem. So you're a solution and people have this big problem. The second one is very related, is you disrupt a very large industry, and so there's already existing demand, but you provide, say, lower cost, or it's just good enough, and so you bring in non-consumers or consumers who are like, this thing is too expensive or it's too complicated. The third one is you just deliver a whole new level of, it's way more entertaining, it's way more convenient, it's a super distraction, and then that generates a lot of demand usage. Another one is there's an emerging class of buyers. These are a set of people who are buying. They haven't been served before. They're serving a new use case, and so you just service that market or that subunit. Another one is you're delivering superior UX. It's a very large market, and it's filled with incumbents who just solve it poorly. The experience is not great. It's not a good end-to-end experience. It's really junky. Maybe even something like the customer service. You just deliver a superior experience. And then maybe there's some latent status need that's just unmet, or you turn something that hasn't had status and you make status a key decision maker, or you make it accessible to people who want status who couldn't get it before. So while these are true for regular companies, it's not just for protocols. Protocols need to, because it's presuming a different business model based on the blockchain, they have to leverage inherent advantages and differences, which is, answering why does a blockchain-based protocol provide not only the things that feed demand, but also those other elements. What is specific about the blockchain? So what are characteristics that you can sort of layer on top of everything else, which are only possible with blockchains? So one of those, which is sort of one of the more exciting ones, it's a new product feature that's not possible unless it's with the blockchain. So in this example, for network services, it's the quality or coverage of the service. So in both of these cases, the token, the blockchain, addresses the supply in this case because there are topology and capex constraints of building a really great like 5G or IoT network. So that creates features such as coverage in dense urban cities that's not available for end users or the network operators. And there isn't a way to actually access that service, provide that service, unless you were able to do things with the blockchain. So that's a good example. Other ones are immutability of the data or quantity. So it's necessary that the data or quantity is immutable. It's proven scarcity, or the data that's associated with the service needs to be immutable, and that's something that's super great for blockchains. There's some counterparty risks that you want to do with trust minimization. So the service, so a lot of DeFi, creates a whole new sort of category of potential customers because of what's possible by removing the counterparty risk or the middleman through trust minimization. So those are additional characteristics, but you still want to make sure that you're entering a market where there's pent-up demand or it has some of those other attributes to build demand. So really, the solution of building a growing protocol needs to draw from traditional product management. So someone who's been in product management would have to have answered a lot of those questions about what truly generates demand because it's what users want. Layering in, well, is this compelling because of blockchain characteristics? So many of these things aren't necessarily even technical. A lot of it is really just understanding the customer and designing the product around that. So once we have that, and that has to come first, can token design incentivize demand? And so that becomes a very interesting part of the design space, right? Once you have a product that does, have some kind of product market fit based on the things that we talked about before, like it really does solve a problem, it's disrupting a large incumbents through price, features, UX, any one of those things, then can the tokens design incentivize demand? I think there's a very interesting design space on the demand side, but it's always important that it's secondary to product market fit. In other words, it's very hard to incentivize someone to use a bad product. Now, it could incentivize people to bootstrap it in the beginning, could incentivize people to put up with it in the beginning, but provide the kind of feedback you need to get product market fit. But it can't be alone, and we've seen some examples where that's happened. So what are some of the things that an incentive, when you design that in on the token and the product, can make sense? So one is you create belonging or identity benefits through membership. There's exclusivity, or there's meaning associated with the identity of belonging, right? The second one is the incentives provide financial reward for the right sort of set of time preferences. So that's another layer of the segmentation and personas. You have to think about time preferences for these financial rewards very, very carefully in terms of how long the holding period for the tokens. Can the token ownership allow composable access to additional layers of benefits and features? And those accrue over time, or some composition allows new access unlocks to completely different products or services on top of those other things. Does owning it have status or social capital? And then is the design of the reward or the discovery provide dopamine hits? So this is borrowing from sort of traditional incentive mechanisms. So layering more and more of these in the mechanisms which becomes very interesting because of the ability to sort of like have provable ownership, to be able to have programmable time preferences sort of baked into it, the composability with other affiliated or perhaps completely permissionlessly the products. We're already seeing some very interesting dynamics in status and social capital. And at the end of the day, there's still some dopamine experience, which I think some projects are experiencing with. So understanding the personas and then being able to take some of these elements in the design space and then creating the programmability for these things is a very interesting opportunity to me. Now, there are some cautionary tales about going into incentive design for demand. So one is mistaking we're doing a great job of incenting demand, but you really are incenting supply. And so you never really get a clear picture of demand. And so making sure it's demand for the service, and ideally it's paying for the service so that it becomes sustainable. And there's lots of different ways. It's a whole other area around that. The second one is making it all speculative. So some things you can still use some of those incentives, but they're way into the future, or the value is speculative, so it's not really building on top of value. So the expected status, for example, might be purely speculative, or the time preferences and what people expect in their holding period is only based on speculative value capture from the demand to return value back to those who are holding the tokens from an incentive perspective. So if there's a huge spend on the demand side, but that doesn't get recaptured in some way, it doesn't have to be a direct pass-through, but in some way, then that's also, you're going to start losing out. You just have a poor product. It's just bad. It's not usable. It's a game that nobody likes. It's a product that people won't use. And then kind of like related to speculative, you just have poor time preference constraints. You want people, you're attracting people who just want in and cash out right away. They don't have a holding period. So this is just sort of me trying to get my ideas out there. So welcoming conversation with other people around these. But, the general summary is really the time for thinking about demand is now, because that is what's going to drive the sustainability, just like any business. If there's no customers, but they did a great job of providing huge inventory for a product, you'd be kind of like out of luck. So using as a quintessential example of an incredible business is Amazon captures lots of demand because they have massive distribution, and they happen to have done it with massive supply. And so by capturing all the supply of anything anybody would want to buy, they became the aggregator to capture all that demand. And so now they have all this demand that's flowing in to make the business really worth a lot. And so a protocol needs to think about those, and there's a lot of other dimensions around designing and ensuring that the protocol is serving lots of demand. All right. That's it for this one. If you have questions, put them in the comments. Let me know. Talk to you later.